Hello and welcome back to another Dare to Game video. Today we're playing Starfield and we're going to be going through some weapons. So there are a lot of weapons in Starfield, both in terms of just overall variety, so there's a lot of different types of weapons, and also the game uses a randomized loot system, which I'm not normally a huge fan of, but it does have some unique, so it balances out well enough for me, where you can get just a ton of different variety of weapons. I'm going to attempt to rank them to tell you which ones are the best ones, so if you get a real good one of a certain variety, to keep your hands on it, because some of them, although being significantly less common, a lot more rare, are much better. So we're going to be starting off with the easiest category today, which is melee weapons. So we'll be going down. I have isolated 9, and I've done a ton of looting, over 100 hours on this specific playthrough, and I've isolated 9 different varieties of melee weapon in the game. If there are more, let me know down in the comment section. I definitely want to know about that. Tell me if I'm missing a specific type of melee weapon, but these are the ones that I have found so far, and I'm fairly confident they're the only melee weapons that exist in the game. So we're going to be going through them. I'm not doing specific ones. These aren't unique melee weapons. I'm not saying like this specific legendary one is the best. I'm just saying this type of melee weapon across the board is going to be the best. If you find a rare one that is lower on the list, that might be better than a standard one that's higher, but as a general rule, this is the ranking. So let's just start off with number 9. And so at number 9, we have one of the most common weapon types in the game, especially the most common for melee weapons, the Ripshank. So it's basically just a small knife. Some might call it a shank. I'm sure it's called a rip, maybe because it's got this angle off it, or maybe because the back has some slight serrations on it. Whatever the case is, it's just a shank. And you'll find, I feel like the first one of these you'll get is in the very first mission in the game, so they're very common and you will probably have one. It is, however, the worst melee weapon in the game, and it's worst for a number of reasons. For one thing, it just doesn't deal a lot of damage. It has the lowest damage out of all of these on this list. You can see we've got 24 here. It should be about, I believe, 19 without perks making it higher. So obviously some of your skills are going to affect melee weapon damage, and I have some of those leveled up, but this one does typically across the board have the lowest damage. It's also rather small, and so therefore doesn't have very long reach. That's another thing to consider with melee weapons. So just overall, the Ripshank is the worst of the 9 melee weapons in Starfield. The next one we're going to be looking at is, at number 8, the combat knife. So again, this one is going to be a fairly common weapon. You'll find these kind of all over the place. All factions use them. Spacers commonly have them. They're very, very common. In fact, you'll even find these just stuck into the wall in dartboards in certain areas, sitting on counters. So there's a lot of combat knives. It's possibly the only melee weapon that is more common than the Ripshank, so you're very likely to find a combat knife. That being said, it is slightly better than the Ripshank, despite being about the same size, so still suffering from that lower reach, which makes sense considering it's a knife and not a sword, and so therefore you're going to need to get relatively close to an enemy to use it. This one does, on average, have higher damage. So you can see I've got 26 physical damage. I find this one is typically going to be right around that 24-25 range, not accounting for skills. So it does more damage than the Ripshank, and so therefore it just automatically is going to rank higher as the next one. I also think it looks cooler. So yes, the combat knife takes the number 8 spot. Let's move on to number 7. At number 7, we have the emergency axe, and here we're taking a decent step up from the last one in a couple things. Damage. This one does, on average, just have a couple points more damage that it'll deal than the combat knife, so therefore it's better in that regard. Another advantage that the not titanium, that's just this variant of it, the rescue axe has over the Ripshank and the combat knife is reach. You do get a significant, probably about twice as much reach with the axe as you do with the knives, so it's good for that, but just on the whole, I find it to be a better melee weapon, and so therefore it is going to take the number 7 spot. So that's the rescue axe at number 7. At number 6, we have probably the most common as far as length weapons go, ones that are actually up into the sword range, and we have the UC Naval Cutlass. So this is going to be a very common weapon amongst your United Colonies factions, so the Vanguard and the Sistef, and just general security on UC planets. So this one is also quite common. I've found a lot of variants of this one. It's a significant step up from the rescue axe, having quite a bit more damage. You can see we've got 33 here. Again, just going to have that improved reach over all of the weapons we've previously looked at. It's nice and thin. It's got a higher swing speed on average than the axe does. I find the Cutlass to be, a significantly better weapon than any of the ones we've looked at so far. So yes, the UC Naval Cutlass, despite not being ridiculously good or any sort of a weeb slashing steel cutting weapon or anything ridiculous like that, it just does make a very solid melee weapon. So that's why the UC Naval Cutlass takes the number 6 spot on our melee weapons list for Starfield. At number 5, we have a knife, and so this one we're going back down as far as reach goes, but we are also going up for damage and up for cool factor. So the Barrow Knife can be found pretty much anywhere, so it's relatively common. I find it most frequently on Freestar Collective planets, but I've also seen it basically everywhere. It just seems that that's where it is most commonly found. It is modeled after a Bowie knife, but the only difference being that it's got some structural cutouts in it, which make it look a little bit more futuristic, despite having the entire rest of the knife being literally just a Bowie knife, which, you know, is a weapon invented in the 1800s on Earth. So it would be fun to be using this in the future in space. So I just find that a little bit fun. But outside of that, it obviously has a very unique and cool look to it, very iconic, and like I said, does more damage than the Cutlass on average. So the Barrow Knife is an excellent melee weapon. I quite like it, and that's why it takes the number 5 spot. At number 4, we've got another knife, this one being the Osmium Dagger. So this is an interesting weapon. I think I most often find this one from Ecliptic mercenaries and Varun people. They seem to be using it more often than pretty much anyone else, but I've found it all over the place. It's just a futuristic looking straight blade knife. I actually kind of like it. I wish there was various animations for the melee weapons. I wish with something like this, you didn't just have a slash animation. It would be much cooler if it had a stabbing animation, just because that's clearly the type of weapon this is. Design-wise, I actually don't like how thick the blade is. Look how chonky that blade is. It would be like stabbing someone with a very thick letter opener. But, I mean, obviously you could still kill someone with it, so it's not ridiculous in that regard. Again, we're down into the smaller end for reach because this is just a knife, but we're going up another significant step in damage, so this one on average will have deal more damage than the Barrow Knife does. So I find the Osmium Dagger to be a pretty dang good weapon. It definitely doesn't look as out of place as the Bowie Knife does in, you know, the future in space travel. It is definitely a more sci-fi looking weapon. It actually reminds me aesthetically of like the Dune franchise, so if you're going for the vibroblade sort of Dune thing, this would be a good way to go for that, just because appearance-wise I think it really matches that. But yeah, that's the Osmium Dagger, which takes the number 4 spot. Let's move on to number 3. So at number 3 we have the last of our knives, and also probably the longest of our knives, the Tanto. So it's a Japanese style straight blade knife. I know that the Tanto style typically just refers to the point of a knife, and I don't know that this actually looks as much like the Tanto blades that I'm familiar with, or Tanto. I'm probably going to annoy some people by saying both of them, but that's the way that I like to do things. Anyway, appearance-wise I really like this one, and damage-wise it's another serious step up. So you can see over the Osmium Dagger we are now up to 66, so on average across the board you're going to have a pretty serious damage increase with the Tanto from the Osmium Dagger. With that in mind, it's also just a very cool looking weapon. I like this one a lot for my assassin-y type builds. So I've done basically 2 different melee builds that I've been working on, and eventually I'll probably make a video on. We have a stealth assassin one, which I like to use a knife for, just because, you know, stereotypically that's the weapon for it. And then we have a direct sort of Jedi / Ronin samurai type build, where we're using longer weapons. And this one is the one that I prefer the best, once you can get a good one of it, for the assassin build. The Tanto really works for that. I like it aesthetically, and obviously damage-wise, you can deal a lot of damage with this weapon. So that is the one that takes the number 3 spot. Let's move on to number 2 for melee weapons. Our runner-up at number 2 is going to be a lot of people's absolute favorite melee weapon in the game. It is the Wakazashi, so a type of Japanese sword similar to a katana. The Wakazashi, I believe, is longer, if I've got this correct. I am not an expert on Japanese weaponry as far as medieval weaponry goes. I'm much more of a Western European fan than any type of Asian, and so I am not a weeb. But with that being said, it is a cool looking weapon. I really enjoy it. It's obviously a bit towards the thick side, but video game melee weapons typically fall under that. Otherwise, design on this one is pretty dang good. I like the standard, not over the top or not ridiculously sci-fi look of it. It looks a little bit more futuristic than a real life one, but still holds a lot of that tradition, which if you're going for a weapon as old as this, I feel like the tradition is what makes it worth it. With that being said, damage-wise, this one is going to be a huge jump. So you saw how high the Tanto was compared to the ones before it. The Wakazashi is another whole step above that. So it's just a whole nother level of extremely good. So I would understand why a lot of people would think this one is the best one in the game, because honestly, it's really great. And given the fact that it is also the longest melee weapon, and so therefore has the best reach out of all of them in the game, it is up there for me as well. I definitely really enjoy this one. But with that being said, there's one that deals more damage and I actually like more, and is significantly more rare. So a lot of people might not have seen it, but that one is the one that we'll be doing at number 1. And so finally, at the number 1 spot, we have the Varun Painblade. And now this one is only about knife length, but I really, really enjoy this one. For one thing, the damage damage it deals is ridiculously high. You can see that we've currently got 102 here, and that's over a top quality and layer Wakazashi. That's a huge jump there for this Varun Painblade. Like I said, actually a significantly more rare weapon. I typically only find it when it's being looted off of Varun extremists, so you have to find them, and they're one of the more rare enemies to run into until you get into the level 70, 75 systems out there. But with that being said, if you find it, it's worth holding on to because it is a ridiculously good weapon. So just stat-wise, I really love it. Another thing about it, now like I said, I don't typically go for it with the assassin builds because I like the thinner style of the Tanto for that, but this one for a full frontal melee attack type, I really like it for that. Design-wise, it reminds me a lot of like a Klingon weapon from Deep Space Nine, not so much from Next Generation because they pretty much just focus on the batleth. But this looks like something you'd see a Klingon wield in the Klingon Cardassian War or something like that, so I really get a kick out of it from a sci-fi perspective. Design-wise, I also quite like it. It's got a more centered grip, so the blade is just along the front of it, so not so much a stabbing weapon. I mean, it comes to enough of a point that you could stab with it. Definitely more of a slashing, chopping weapon, but it would be really well designed for space combat because, yes, it doesn't have ridiculous length, but when you're fighting in the corridors of like a ship or something like that, this is about perfect length for what you actually want, but still has more of the mass to it and the design that would allow you to still have very powerful chopping or slashing attacks with it. So I love the design of this one. I love how much damage it does, and for all of those reasons, it takes the #1 spot for the best melee weapons in Starfield. And there you have it. That's it. That's the whole premise of these videos. I hope you enjoyed it, found it useful. Maybe I showed you some weapons that you haven't found yet, you didn't know existed yet, and so now you can keep your eyes out for them. Like I said, if you found melee weapons of different types on here that I haven't covered, I haven't found any sort of an energy melee weapon, which really bums me out because I wanted to do like a Jedi build with some sort of a lightsaber. I'm probably just going to end up finding some form of an electrolyzed or something, Wakazashi or something like that. But if I've missed any, definitely let me know down in the comment section below. But in any case, thanks a ton for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching another Dare to Game video. If you liked this video, please leave a like and a comment. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. If you like my content and would like to support this channel, consider becoming a member today for as little as $1.99 a month. It makes a huge difference. But in any case, thanks for watching and have a nice day. I'll see you next time.